So from 1802 to 1880, those 78 years that she spent on earth in the 19th century laid the groundwork for the 20th century. She was ahead of her time, promoting feminism, civil rights, religious freedom, and economic justice. In her mother's book, published in 1831, she encouraged learning in children with the mother as a guide. She writes, "Too much cannot be said on the importance of giving children early habits of observation. This must be done by teaching them to pay attention to surrounding objects and to inquire to the why and wherefore of everything. No doubt many mothers will say, 'I cannot thus train the minds of my children, for it is my misfortune not to have had an education myself.' Because in their day, they weren't educated because they were just a girl." But Childs writes, "This answer is very frequently given, and if by education is meant book learning, the excuse is indeed a poor one. Early accustom your children to inquire about the things they handle. What if you cannot always answer them? You do them an immense deal of good by giving their minds active habits. If a spirit of inquiry is once aroused, it will sooner or later find means to satisfy itself." So her idea of teaching was not to give the kids answers, but to teach them to ask questions. Does that sound familiar to what we do here in our religious education? And she writes about religious education. She says, "In early life should be addressed to the heart rather than to the mind. The affection should be filled with love and gratitude to God, but no attempt should be made to introduce doctrinal opinions into the understanding. Even if they could be understood, it would not be well to teach them. It is better that the mind should be left in perfect freedom to choose its creeds. If the feelings are religious, God will enlighten the understanding. He who really loves what is good will perceive what is true." So that she, in 1831, was talking about teaching religious education, not in teaching the creeds, but teaching the underlying feelings of human compassion and caring, and let people decide their creeds later on. A big influence on our tradition. In an appeal in the favor of that class of Americans called Africans, she was fearless in her critique of the economic system that sustained it. "While we bestow our earnest disapprobation on the system of slavery, let us not flatter ourselves that we are in reality any better than our brethren of the South. The Southerners have long continued habit, apparent interest, and dreaded danger to palliate the wrong they do, but we stand without excuse. They tell us that Northern ships and Northern capital have been engaged in this wicked business, and the reproach is true." So she held the North as accountable as the South in the matter of slavery, where other abolitionists of the day tended to stand on the side of moral righteousness, pointing the finger at the South. She understood the whole systematic nature of slavery in the U.S. economy. And she also attacked the social restrictions of racism. "In the first place, an unjust law exists in this Commonwealth of Massachusetts by which marriages between persons of different color is pronounced illegal. I am perfectly aware of the gross ridicule which I may subject myself by alluding to this particular, but I have lived too long and observed too much to be disturbed by the world's mockery. In the first place, the government ought not to be invested with the power to control affections any more than consciences of citizens. A man has at least as good a right to choose his wife as he has to choose his religion." She was so influential. Now, her stuff was written off by the majority of people because she was just a girl. But she was just a girl in the congregation of William Ellery Channing, who was a major preacher with a national following, the founder of this new movement called Unitarianism. And she needled him and said, "You have to speak out on this. You have to speak out on this." And after 15 years, he finally wrote his book on slavery, which then, of course, was paid attention to because he was a man of standing, which gave some theological underpinning to the abolition movement. She continued through her life looking at world religions and knowing that truth comes in more than one form. And then in the preface to her book, Aspirations of the World, she says, "I do not assume any one religion is right in its theology or that others are wrong. I merely attempt to show that the primeval impulses of the human soul have been essentially the same everywhere. And my impelling motive is to do all I can to strengthen and enlarge the bond of human brotherhood." And in this book, she includes some parables and one that she wrote herself. The ever-flowing river. There is a beautiful river whose source is in the perennial springs hidden from human eyes. Rains from heaven fall into it over rocky barriers with musical gurgling like the gushing voice of blackbirds in the springtime. And the water, as it rolls down, waves upward its incense of mist, which the sun kisses and welcomes with the smiles of rainbows. And the river that receives the gentle cascade is broad and deep, and in some places so calm and clear that flowers on the banks nod to themselves in its mirror. But worst of all is a strange hallucination which seizes upon many who come to obtain water for their own use. They bring vessels of all sizes, some as large as a barrel, others no bigger than a thimble. But whether the vessels be large or small, each one, when he has filled his own, declares that he has the whole river in his possession, and that no other can have a drop of it unless it be obtained from his vessel. And not only does each one consider himself the sole proprietor of the river, but he also assumes that the river is exactly in the shape of his particular vessel. If that is globular, he says the river is orb-shaped. If the vessel is a barrel, he declares the river to be long and circular. If he scoops up a little of it in a clamshell, he insists that its only form is that of a clamshell. Even so slight a variation as the attempt to dip with an oyster shell gives rise to contention. So excited do they all become that each pelts each other with stones to maintain for their respective vessels the exclusive monopoly of the river. Sometimes a philosopher comes along and says, "Do not you perceive, friends, that water takes the form of whatever it is put into, and that each of you has only a small portion of the mighty river, in a vessel of such shape and dimensions as you have brought to it?" Then they all unite to throw stones at the philosopher. And while they are thus occupied, alligators lie in wait slyly to seize some of the angry combatants. But far away from this discordant noise of hurling stones, the mighty river, fed by perennial springs, flows on, calmly, with gentle lapsing music, furnishing pure drink to the thirsty and health to those who bathe in its deep waters. That is what we are trying to accomplish here at the Unitarian Universalist Church. Knowing that each of us has a piece of what is eternal and infinite. And our understanding of it may be contradictory, but we need each other's opinions to bring balance. And so let us continue to work to share that pure water of all that is good in religion and philosophy and human idealism, and not be bound by the limitation of our vessels.